I'm just here getting set up for a review of the Burson Soloist 3X GT 2023 version, and before I get into that one, I just wanted to do a really short micro review as a separate video here, talking just about the Burson Audio mothership. The mothership is the stand that you see here. It's available in two versions. There's a 2-tier and a 4-tier version. And as you can see, it's designed to perfectly hold Burson's own components, but it also holds all sorts of other gear as well. Sitting behind me on the desk, I've got things like the Eversolo DMP A6. That's coming up for review, by the way. That's their streaming product. I've also got the Linear Tube Audio MZ3 tube amp sitting on top of my 4-tier mothership. The Enlium Amp 23R sits in there, as well as the Topping D70 Pro and A70 Pro. They're coming up for review too. And even the Chord Hugo TT2 and M Scaler sit really nicely on the bottom shelf. So they're very versatile. They're not for Burson only, but of course you do need to be aware of the size of these. So I wanted to give you a really quick tour and give you my impressions after using these for a while. Taking off the Soloist now and putting that aside, let's take a look at what you get if you buy yourself a mothership. The Mothership 1, which is the 2-tiered version, is $400 US. The Mothership 2, which is the 4-tier version, that's $600 US. And what you get when you buy these is a lovely full aluminium stand. If I pick it up now, and it's got a bit of weight to it, you've got this beautiful big flat panel on the bottom that's going to keep it nice and stable. You can also sit some components on top of it. You then get these two shelves which kind of slot in. There's some bars down through the middle that lock them in place. I'm not going to show you that. It's not really relevant to the review. But the stuff that is relevant to the review is around here on the back. Actually, before I turn it around, I should mention we've got these cutouts here. That's going to help with cooling for your devices. It allows airflow underneath the device as well as on top of the device. And being metal, these will act somewhat as heat sinks as well. Turning it around, looking at the back, and what you can see here is the channel for your cable management. And this is both good and bad. This is still a review, so I'm going to be both pros and cons here. On the top, we've got a little kind of management panel. This helps the cables to go down through the hole and then keep them neat and tidy on top. That's not a big deal. But the bit that does get a little bit tricky for me is this sliding panel here. Now I'm going to remove it with the audio muted because it's not a particularly nice sound. And then once that's out, what we can get to is all of our different cables. You can see here where my fingers are that you've got the wires can come from your various devices out through the hole there, down through the channel, and then out through this hole at the very bottom. And this is all well and good. If you've just got basic cables going on, it's completely fine. But there are a couple of things that I think you should be aware of before you buy the mothership. And that is that these holes here don't always line up with where the connectors are on your various devices. And then on top of that, depending on how much depth you have in the device, you may find that the back of the device sits very close to this tube for the cables. What that means is it can be very hard to get the cable to come out of the dedicated hole in the channel and then bend enough to get safely into your devices. And so what I've found is that when I'm using the mothership, and I'll demonstrate here, when I'm using the mothership, if you imagine this is one of the shelves that's kind of down lower and there's still this vertical column coming up higher, what I often do is kind of actually have my cables coming around the column and straight into these connectors. Because as you can imagine, having a cable come out of a hole, turn really sharply 90 degrees, and then really sharply another 90 degrees into that XLR connection, that can be a bit tough. The other thing I have an issue with this channel is that if you do have power cables and XLR cables and RCA cables and maybe speaker cables, let's say you're running a Soloist GT with a pair of Timekeeper GTs that I've just recently reviewed, and then also some speaker cables to then connect up your speakers, that's a lot of cables to run through this channel here. On top of that, if you happen to be running non-Burson gear that uses main size cables instead of DC connectors, which are much thinner cables, if you're running full-size mains cables, this channel can get really clogged in a hurry. So do be aware of that. If you're factoring this into your overall system, you do need to make sure you've got plenty of extra wiggle room in your cables. Make sure you've got more length than you need so you can give some space for the cables to kind of come out and do a big wide loop or just bypass going through the channel altogether for your cable management. And so overall what I'd say is that in terms of the cable management side of things, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of this system, but I also understand that Burson had to find a balance between making it bulky, making it look sleek, and also making it highly usable. If you've got a fairly simple system with just a couple of XLRs or RCAs and maybe a set of timekeepers with speaker cables, you're probably going to be okay, particularly if you don't put everything through the channel and maybe just loop a couple of things down directly behind and not through the channel. So in other words, you'd probably use the channel just for cables that are going all the way to the ground. In that context, this works really well, but in other contexts, you may struggle a little bit to get the most out of the cable management channel. But let's put that aside for a moment. I'm going to put this back in. let's put that aside for a moment and talk about what I do love about the mothership. And that is that it suddenly means you can have multiple devices that only take up this much space on your desk. So it's vastly better than having everything laid out in a row, or even worse sometimes, stacking everything on top of each other, and that can be an issue for heat. It could also be an issue for scratching devices, etc. So from that point of view, and I'm going to turn this back around now, from that point of view, I do really love the mothership. One of the other things that I really like about the mothership is the fact that it's got these shelves that are very deep. They're going to fit most devices quite happily. They're also very stable. It can take a lot of weight very, very easily. And then it's also going to isolate all your devices a little bit from the desk, because there's a little bit of give in this shelf, as you can see. And if you've got that sort of give, that means that vibrations coming off your desk, off your work surface, aren't going to quickly and easily transfer into your devices. So all in all, I think the mothership is a wonderful accessory. If you're like me and you're looking for a compact way of having multiple devices on a desk or a bench or a cabinet somewhere, then this is an absolutely fantastic way to achieve it. You do need to think a little bit about your cable management before you go too far down this path. Make sure you've got enough cable length, or you've got ways to get around some of those kind of tight corners that I mentioned. And again, that can be as simple as just not using the cable channel for all your cables, just use it for the ones coming from the ground. And if you're able to do that, you've got yourself here a really sleek and fantastic system. And as I mentioned before, don't forget that if you're buying the 2-tier or the 4-tier, you can also use this bottom plate to place items on as well. There's no reason not to. I do it here and it's fantastic. That said, you will want to make sure that your devices going on the bottom shelf are not too big for it. Something like a Gustard A26 or R26 DAC is a little bit too wide for this, and so what you'll have is one set of feet on the plate and the other set of feet hanging off the side. So do be aware of that. Check out the measurements. They're all on the Burson website, which I've linked down below. By the way, there's no affiliations on this review. I make nothing if you buy these products. But I do think that for those that don't have the space to go horizontally with your devices, this is a brilliant way to go vertical. And as I said, it's going to fit almost all devices out there. It's only the really chunky stuff like, say, the Hollow gear, some of the Gustard gear. It's only those really chunky products that don't fit well on a mothership. So go check out the link if this sounds interesting. I highly recommend them. They're a beautiful system, and I hope if you do get them, you'll enjoy using them and setting them up as much as I do. Now, as I said before, this is a really short video, so I'm going to cut things off there, but make sure you hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell, because I've got so much great gear coming down the track. As I mentioned, the Eversolo DMP A6, I've got the Burson Soloist 3X GT 2023 versions, there's the Timekeeper GT reviews that I've just put out, that's Burson's monoblocks. I've also got the Topping D70 Pro and A70 Pro. And there's heaps more that I'm probably forgetting about. So make sure, there's also the new Hyperman gear, of course. We've got the Arya Organic. We've got the Ananda Nano. We've got the Svanar Wireless IEM from Hyperman. I've also got the Audivina, and you might be interested to hear my take on that one. The EF600. There's buckets coming. So hit subscribe, ring the notification bell. But for now, let me leave it to the music, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.